in a slideshow, and we will be cooking with gas, or at least cooking. All right, to the slideshow. Slideshow from beginning. Okay, so what are we looking at in the fiction overview? Somebody get something that thing was about to eat?
I just now saw it.
Okay. All right. What we're going to be doing, this is very similar to the poetry overview, where we're looking at ways to understand our poems better. What does that do? I think by eliminating confusion and giving you tools to be able to approach a story, break it down, understand it better, is a good way for us as readers and literary analysis writers to get to a good spot and have come up with good ideas about our short story. So we need a story to work with, and we're going to start with a story by James Joyce called Araby. This comes from a short story collection called The Dubliners, published in 1914. That date is significant because it's before the First World War started, because the First World War started in August of 1914. So these stories would have been written before the war began. James Joyce is one of the best known Irish writers out there, with St. Patrick's Day coming up sometime soon. Well, not sometime, it's March 17th, it always is. I thought it's a good story to start with. This is called a coming-of-age story. And we have a couple of those in our reading for this unit. What is a coming-of-age story, you might ask? A coming-of-age story is where the main character takes a step toward adulthood. Sometimes it's called the loss of innocence. Okay? Where, well, we have lots of things in our lives, good and bad. You know, your first crush, first sip of alcohol, you ever tried a cigarette, the first time you had your heart broken, when you realize that your parents didn't know everything. All of these are parts of losing innocence that could be part of a coming-of-age story. Okay, note when you are referring to short stories in your work, they are in quotation marks, not sized. This becomes especially important for a story like The Things They Carry. The collection that comes from is called The Things They Carry. So the title of the collection is in italics, whereas the title of the short story that we're going to read is in quotation marks. Okay, so what we're going to do, and you can follow along on page 242 of your book, is we're going to listen to Araby being read. And you should be able to hear it if you're watching this video online, because the speakers are pretty close. This guy has a good deep voice.
Araby from Dubliners by James Joyce. North Richmond Street, being blind, was a quiet street except at the hour when the Christian Brothers School set the boys free. An uninhabited house of 2 stories stood at the blind end, detached from its neighbours in a square ground. The other houses of the street, conscious of decent lives within them, gazed at one another with brown, imperturbable faces. When the short days of winter came, dusk fell before we had well eaten our dinners.
To give you an idea, I looked this up once. Around the winter solstice, the sun sets at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Dublin, where this story takes place. So sun comes up about 9:30 in the morning, sets at 3. So only about 6 hours of daylight. Now, of course, in the summer, sun doesn't set till 11, and comes up again about 4:30. So good and bad.
Where we met in the street, the houses had grown sombre. Above us was the colour of ever-changing violet, and towards it the lamps of the street lifted their feeble lanterns. The cold air stung us, and we played till our bodies glowed. Our shouts echoed in the silent street. The career of our play brought us through the dark, muddy lanes behind the houses, where we ran the gauntlet of the rough tribes from the cottages to the back doors of the dark, dripping gardens, where the odours arose from the ash pits, to the dark, odorous stables, where a coachman smoothed and combed the horse, or shook music from the buckled harness. When we returned to the street, light from the kitchen windows had filled the areas. If Mangan's sister came out on the doorstep to call her brother in to his tea, we watched her from our shadow peer up and down the street. We waited to see whether she would remain or go in, and if she remained, we left our shadow to Mangan's steps resignedly. She was waiting for us, her figure defined by the light from the half-open door. Her brother always teased her before he obeyed, and I stood by the railings looking at her. Her dress swung as she moved her body, and the soft rope of her hair tossed from side to side. Every morning I lay on the floor in the front parlour watching her door. The blind was pulled down to within an inch of the sash so that I could not be seen. When she came out on the doorstep, my heart leapt. I ran to the hall, seized my books, and followed her. I kept her brown figure always in my eye, and when we came near the point at which our ways diverged, I quickened my pace and passed her. This happened morning after morning. I had never spoken to her except for a few casual words, and yet her name was like a summons to all my foolish blood. Her image accompanied me, even in places the most hostile to romance. On Saturday evenings, when my aunt went marketing, I had to go and carry some of the parcels. We walked through the flaring streets, jostled by drunken men and bargaining women, amid the curses of labourers, the shrill litanies of shop boys who stood on guard by the barrels of pigs' cheeks, the nasal chanting of the street singers. These noises converged in a single sensation of life for me. I imagined that I bore my chalice safely through the throng of foes. Her name sprang to my lips at moments in strange prayers and praises which I myself did not understand. My eyes were often full of tears. I could not tell why, and at times a flood from my heart seemed to pour itself out into my bosom. I thought little of the future. I did not know whether I would ever speak to her or not, or if I spoke to her, how I could tell her of my confused adoration. But my body was like a harp, and her words and gestures were like fingers running upon the wires. At last she spoke to me. When she addressed the first words to me, I was so confused I did not know what to answer. She asked me if I was going to Araby. I forgot whether I answered yes or no. It would be a splendid bazaar, she said. She would love to go. And why can't you? I asked. She turned a silver bracelet round and round her wrist.
A bazaar, think of kind of a county fair, flea market, or well, flea market's a little bit market, but also, a place where there's entertainment, food, things to buy, things along that nature.
She could not go, she said, because there would be a retreat that week in her convent. Her brother and two other boys were fighting for their caps, and I was alone at the railings. She held one of the spikes, bowing her head towards me. The light from the lamp opposite the door caught the white curve of her neck, lit up her hair that rested there, lit upon the hand upon the railing. It fell over one side of her dress and caught the white border of her petticoat, just visible as she stood at ease. "It's well for you," she said. "If I go," I said, "I will bring you something." What innumerable follies laid waste my waking and sleeping thoughts after that evening. I wished to annihilate the tedious intervening days. I chafed against the work of school. At night in my bedroom and by day in the classroom, her image came between me and the page I strove to read. The syllables of the word Araby were called to me through the silence in which my soul luxuriated and cast an Eastern enchantment over me. I asked for leave to go to the bazaar on Saturday night. My aunt was surprised and hoped it was not some Freemason affair. I answered a few questions in class. His face passed from amiability to sternness. He hoped I was not beginning to idle. I could not call my wandering thoughts together. I had hardly any patience with the serious work of life, which now that it stood between me and my desire, play, ugly, monotonous child's play. On Saturday morning, I reminded my uncle that I wished to go to the bazaar in the evening. He was fussing at the hall stand, looking for the hat brush, and answered me curtly, "Yes, boy, I know." As he was in the hall, I could not go into the front parlour and lie at the window. I felt the house in bad humour and walked slowly towards the school. The air was pitilessly raw, and already my heart misgave me.
At this time, students would have gone to school 6 days a week as opposed to 5. It would have been a half day on Saturday, but they still would have gone on Saturday.
When I came home to dinner, my uncle had not yet been home. From the front window, I saw my companions playing below in the street. Their cries reached me, weakened and indistinct, and leaning my forehead against the cool glass, I looked over at the dark house where she lived. I may have stood there for an hour, seeing nothing but the brown-clad figure cast by my imagination, touched discreetly by the lamplight at the curved neck, at the hand upon the railings, and at the border below the dress. At 9 o'clock, I heard my uncle's latchkey in the hall door. I heard him talking to himself, and heard the hall stand rocking when it would receive the weight of his overcoat. I could interpret these signs. When he was midway through,
Interpret what signs? Where's his Uncle Ben all day? If he's fumbling with his overcoat and struggling to put his hat up, he's drunk. Yeah.
his dinner, I asked him to give me the money to go to the bazaar. He had forgotten. "The people are in their bed and after their first sleep now," he said. I did not smile. My aunt asked him energetically, "Can't you give him the money and let him go? You kept him late enough as it is." I held a florin tightly in my hand as I strode down Buckingham Street towards the station. I took my seat in a third-class carriage of a deserted train. After an intolerable delay, the train moved out of the station slowly. In a few minutes, the train drew up beside an improvised wooden platform. I passed out onto the road and saw by the lighted dial of the clock that it was 10 minutes to 10. In front of me was a large building which displayed the magical name. I could not find any sixpenny entrance, and fearing that the bazaar would be closed, I passed in quickly through a turnstile, handing a shilling to a weary-looking man. I found myself in a big hall, girded at half its height by a gallery. Nearly all the stalls were closed. The hall was in darkness. I recognized a silence like that which pervades a church after a service. I walked into the center of the bazaar timidly. Remembering with difficulty why I had come, I went over to one of the stalls and examined porcelain vases and flowered tea sets. At the door of the stall, a young lady was talking and laughing with two young gentlemen, English accents, and listened vaguely to their conversation. "Oh, I never said such a thing." "Oh, but I didn't." Observing me, the young lady came over and asked me, did I wish to buy anything? The tone of her voice was not encouraging. She seemed to have spoken to me out of a sense of duty. I looked humbly at the great jars that stood like Eastern guards at either side of the dark entrance to the stall and murmured, "No, thank you." I lingered before her stall, though I knew my stay was useless, to make my interest in her wares seem the more real. Then I turned away slowly and walked down the middle of the bazaar. I allowed the 2 pennies to fall against the 6pence in my pocket. I heard a voice call from one end of the gallery that the light was out. The upper part of the hall was now completely dark. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and derided by vanity, and my eyes burned with anguish and anger.
Okay, and then the video finishes with a picture of Dublin around the turn of the century. All right. So we've listened to a story. Let's think about ways that we can effectively read short stories. Come on, movie. There we go. Okay, so we're looking at how to read literature effectively. Step one, just like with poetry, we're making observations for basic understanding, where we're going through the different parts of the story in order to kind of unpack it. I use the suitcase metaphor with poetry, and it is similar with fiction. We're unpacking this. Now, one of the biggest problems students have is struggling to understand the works. This goes for poetry, fiction, and drama, of course. This is a process that will help you understand the works better. If you understand it, perhaps you will like it better. If you're going to sleep in my class, don't come. Thank you. All right. This will help you avoid frustration. It will help you better prepare to write effective literary analysis. Okay? Basic understanding of the story. So we're looking to explain situations, words, and concepts. Write down words that are unclear or new. While the video is playing, for example, I know that many of you probably would have different things that come to mind when you hear the word bazaar. I believe that's an Arabic word. It's certainly applied more often than not to the Middle East or the Arab world, referring to, you know, some sort of marketplace. Well, in this case, it had a little bit different meaning. That you can use your dictionary to look up words and write them down in your notebook. You know, for example, the stuff that the footnotes isn't going to fill in for you. You know, like Donovan Arasa and things like that. We get footnotes for, but there's other things. You know, stuff you have to look up, like when I mentioned the sun sets in the winter pretty early in Dublin, Ireland. It's a very cold, dank, dark, damp city. Write down questions you have about the story so you can bring them to class. I really recommend that when you're reading these stories and you're doing your homework, you're preparing for class, that you take notes. And if you're listening to this online, of course, you know, write down any notes or questions you might have, because somebody else in the class may have the same question. And if I can answer everybody's questions, I'd be happy to. Okay. So, for basic understanding of a story, continue. You need to figure out what's going on in the work. Okay, we've looked up words, situations, people, instances that we don't necessarily know. What is the setting? What does it show? So let's think about Dublin for the setting for Araby. Is this the rich part of Dublin? Certainly wouldn't indicate that. And also, if we know anything about Ireland before they gained their independence in 1920, Catholics couldn't vote, couldn't own property for the most part. Irish Catholics were severely repressed under English rule of Ireland. Who is the major figure or protagonist of this story? So who is the major figure here? Who is the story about? Okay, the narrator. Okay. Well, all I heard was a mumble, so if you're going to talk into your desk, I'm not going to be able to hear you. Okay, yes, certainly the narrator here. Now, is the narrator telling the story as the 11 or 12-year-old boy, or is he telling it as an adult? As an adult, which makes a big difference to the way we view the story. Why? Because the adult knows the meaning of these events and is going to construct the story in such a way that we get the details that we need to show how this event impacted this person's life. If it's a first-person narrator who's telling the story as it happens, then they're finding out at the same time we're finding out as readers. Okay, so there is a big difference. We're going to read another story that is told from the adult perspective, and that's important. Amy Tan's story, Two Kinds, also is told from this adult, digested perspective. What are some of the relationships the characters have with one another? So let's go back to Araby. What is Megan's sister's relationship to our narrator? She's the object of his affection, certainly. What is her name? The story never says. She's just identified as Mangan's sister. Who's Mangan? Who is Mangan? The young men in the room, if you were to refer to one of your friend's sister as Bob's sister, then who's Bob? Her brother, certainly. But one of your friends, somebody he goes to school with, a contemporary of our narrator. This is an older sister. This makes a big difference, too, because if we're assuming the narrator's 11, 12 years old when this story takes place, and Mangan's sister is 16, 17 years old, is she even attainable?
Yeah.
For a 12-year-old? No, she's going to be married long before he's even able to date her. She'll probably be married before she's 20. So, this is a person that's not even attainable for our narrator. So she's kind of completely representative of a crush or an infatuation, which is why we have the narrator who is so mad at himself at the end of the story, because he's wasted all this time on somebody. He doesn't come to the realization until the end of the story that this is a fruitless adventure, and he's wasting all this time, energy, thought, angst, emotion over something that's not attainable. Okay? Does the story come out and tell us that? No, because literary fiction doesn't. It's our job as readers to be active readers and to see what the narrator, what the author wants us to get out of it. How does the protagonist change in the story? When I was talking about the fiction essay, I made it clear that the protagonist, almost always in a piece of short fiction, is going to experience some sort of change. Usually it's a mental change in attitude, a new worldview, an epiphany, a realization. Sometimes, like in the case of Tessie Hutchinson, it's a physical change. She goes from being living to dead as part of the lottery. Who or what is the antagonist? And just to reiterate, the antagonist does not always have to be a person. It can be a thing or a force. Sometimes the antagonist is poverty. It can be ambition. It can be coveting something. All of these can be the antagonist. So it's either the force or the person acting against the protagonist. Okay. So we're going to try briefly the discussion questions. I hope I don't have to pick out a victim, but I guess I'll get my roll sheet out here so I have my numbers. But let's try as a class to spitball some ideas for the discussion questions at the end of Araby. So, first question is, describe what you consider to be the story's major idea. So what are some of the major ideas that are going on in this story? Certainly. What is the deeper meaning of liking that girl? It's a good place to start. How many of you have been 12 years old? Okay, since we don't have any prodigies in here, you're all over the age of 12. How many of you have had a crush on an older person, whether they were a celebrity or not? Most, if you're not raising your hand, you're lying probably, although I have no proof of that. But certainly, I'm trying to think of when I was 12 who I would have had a crush on. Liked Amy Grant a lot. There's a couple of girls in my school, of course. I could name them, but they'd be meaningless. But we've all had crushes at a younger age for somebody older, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, all that sort of stuff. So this is a major idea in terms of being universal, that we can all, maybe we didn't get in as much trouble as our narrator here, but we certainly can connect with this person's story. This is part of fiction writing that's called the human condition. The human condition. What does a story illustrate about this human condition? Most pieces of short fiction, and this is really regardless of genre, are about something to do with the human condition. What it is like to be a person. And I'll give you some examples too. We have science fiction like The Hunger Games. Katniss sacrifices herself for a family member. That's what initiates the whole storyline. We can relate to that as human beings, because whether it's a sacrifice like basically putting yourself to death, or something as simple as giving up some time for a family member, we've all sacrificed for a family member. That's how we connect with stories. In a large part, that's the purpose of stories, is to connect human beings together. All right, any other major ideas? So we have the obsession with Mangan's sister. What else? We get an idea of what it's like to be poor in Dublin and around the turn of the century? A little bit. There's some of the Protestant and Catholic issues that are present in Ireland that we see here. That's it for the most part. But there are some pretty big major ideas that are going on here, especially the obsession with Mangan's sister. How might the bazaar in Araby be considered symbolically in the story? To what extent does this symbol embody the story's central idea? So if the central idea is Mangan's sister, or more specifically, the obsession with her, how symbolically does Araby embody that idea? How does it embody that idea? A second. What is the narrator hoping to get at Araby? So we can't use the didn't read it excuse because we all read it. He wants to get the girl what? A gift. Get her a present. Get her something. What is that present supposed to do? If we think about this logically, what does he expect, or at least in 12-year-old logic? What's going to happen once he gives her this gift? How many of you have seen A Christmas Story? It shows over and over and over and over again, from Christmas Eve to Christmas Day. Ralphie has all these pictures of what life's going to be like with his new BB gun. He's going to defend his house from Black Bart. Or, he imagines his teacher to be a witch. He imagines his mother to be a jester. He imagines getting soap poisoning and his family hating him or not hating him, hating themselves for being regretful that they ever made him eat soap. Same lines. And so for this narrator, he is pinning all his hopes on Araby. This is where she's going to start noticing me. I'm going to bring her something. Okay, so consider the attitude of the speaker toward his home as indicated in the first paragraph. What do you think why do you think the speaker used blind to describe a dead-end street? So let's start there. Why is the word blind being used? Street. Joyce could have used dead end. That would have been a word in British English. So let's think symbolically. Who is blind in this story? He is to his chances, his adventure, what he's supposed to do, you know, what this is going to do for him, all this stuff. He is blind to reality. And by starting the story off this way, we can use that metaphor throughout. This is a good indication of why when we're working with short stories, it is critically important that you read it at least twice before you write a paper on it. Probably 3 times, but at minimum twice. The first time is to get the story, the plot, what happens, right? The second time is to pick up things you missed. I'll go back to the lottery since it's something you've all, in theory, have read. If you go back and read that story again, you'll notice a lot more things, like the little boys picking up rocks or making piles of rocks at the beginning of the story. And we're going to go over it in class, but you know, you also notice with the lottery, for example, that certain families have family members who are clearly missing. Why are they missing? Well, since we know what happens at the end, they may be missing because they won the lottery in a previous year. The nervousness or the nervous energy that is discussed or displayed in the beginning of the story is explained by the end of it. But if you don't read it a second time, you can't get that analysis through that second reading, because the second reading, you're not reading for plot anymore. You're reading for the essence of the story. What's going on symbolically? What does it mean? What do the characters desire? As you know, we're going to be focusing on for our paper. We talked about the narrator at the end, but just briefly, who is the narrator? Is he the boy or is he the man? Is this a story told by a 12-year-old? No, this is the man. This is the adult telling the story. So again, we know the meaning, or excuse me, the narrator knows the meaning, the context, the import of the story as he's telling it. What effect is produced by this difference in age between the narrator as character and narrator as storyteller? As I just mentioned, the narrator as storyteller, in essence, he's writing about somebody else. If I were to make you sit down and write a story about something that happened to you when you were 11, I'm not going to make you do that, at least not anything more significant than a journal. You're writing about a different person. There's a different level of maturity. Your body's different. You're taller. I assume you weigh more, you maybe not. If you're a fat kid like me, I pretty much weighed the same from 5th grade till I was a freshman in high school. But you're a different person. Even writing at 18 about yourself at 11, you're writing about a different person. So it does make a big difference in the way the story can be told. Okay? All right, so some more tips for reading a story effectively. Keep a notebook. Make a record of your reactions and responses. You know, in my online classes, I have a questions thread. There's discussion threads where you could ask questions. There's emails, there's Canvas messages for my brick and mortar students like you guys in here. You know, if you're writing down questions, things you don't get, even if you don't feel comfortable asking me about it in a whole class discussion as I'm going around in groups, if there was something you didn't understand, you can ask me and get that clarification. How the story, what was memorable about or noteworthy about the story? So without looking at the story, tell me something you remember. It can be anything.
His uncle.
His uncle. Dublin. What else? We were given the opportunity to see the whole story. We'd see that they're living in a priest's house who died in the parlor. That would be memorable. What's memorable about the bazaar? Is it right next to his house?
No, he had to take a train.
Take a train. He had to go through the expensive entrance. Is this a rich family?
No.
No, so it even adds to it. He's not only wasting his time, his energy, his thoughts, his angst, he's also wasting his family's money. Now, of course, you could argue that the uncle's wasting his money at the pub, but nevertheless, how'd the story make you feel? And if it made you feel bored, keep it to yourself. How did it make you feel?
Just made me question the guy, because like this girl was like 20 times older than him. And I was like, why'd you even try?
Well, she's not 222.
Well, I'm just, he's like, there's no way.
Yes, but I mean, that's part of the point of it, too. There's a reason why Ralphie in A Christmas Story connects with people. Because when you're a kid, you have fantasies, you have ideas of how things are going to be that are just preposterous. But you still imagine them anyway. With this narrator, are there any characters or ideas that you like? Hate them all. Well, let me ask you the question in a different way. Is there any characters that you felt for, that you felt empathy, not sympathy? Sympathy is feeling somewhat sorry for a person. Empathy is where you feel something for somebody. You care what happens to them. Did you feel empathy for any of the characters? I always feel for Mangan's sister. Especially if we presume that this is based off a real person. I mean, can you imagine somebody reading Dubliners? Oh, hey, Jimmy from down the street wrote a book. Hey, I'm 5 years older than him. My little brother was good friends with. Wait a minute. Can you imagine being that girl? But I do feel for Mangan's sister because she's clueless in all of this, and really is not guilty in any way. She just is who she is. But I always feel for this narrator, where he's trying to act on something that's impossible. He has this impossible hope, and it can never come to fruition. At least not at the moment. And even likely down the road, it would be difficult. Are there any ideas or characters you don't like? Uncle? Yeah, the uncle made a promise and didn't keep it. That's generally somebody we're going to at least dislike. Hate's a strong word. Reserve that for very few people. But certainly, it's easy to dislike the uncle. I kind of don't like Mangan because he always seems to be getting in the way of his friend gawking at his sister. Of course, if Mangan knew he was gawking at his sister, he'd probably punch him in the face. So that's what I did to my friends who gawked at my sister. So that's why I assume that that's what he would do. Are there any parts of the story that are hard to understand? Don't say all of it. Is there anything that, at least when you were listening to it on the video and reading along, that you found hard to understand? Nope. Crystal clear, clear as day. Well, we can save that for later, but that's certainly a question you should ask yourself when you're reading any of these stories. Part of keeping the notebook is writing down stuff that you didn't quite get, because you can ask questions of either your classmates or me, or look it up later. Be careful with the internet, of course. We tend to trust anything we read on the internet. Oh, wow, I've gone way over. Let me know. Okay, well, we're going to pick this up again tomorrow, but this is one of the last slides. So, not tomorrow. For Wednesday, make sure you do your reading. Get your poetry essay in tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share.
Can we resubmit that? Because I forgot to do a couple things on it.
Yeah, you can resubmit your poetry essay. As long as it's before the deadline, it won't be late.
Okay.
If you're watching this online, make sure you take a look at the last few slides. I'm going to click through them right now. Let me go ahead and